Hello and welcome to Bury Our Bones with Cinema, a podcast that lives, breathes and dies classic movies, not so classic movies and everything in between. I'm once again joined by the Luke Skywalker to my arrested for being a jaywalker, the memorable Simon Keet. In today's episode we study Roger Donaldson's 1997 disaster movie Dante's Peak. So join us as we fall in love with a man who looks like he should work for MI5, woo the mayor's family with a dodgy magic trick, and finally wonder why everyone else seems to be running in the opposite direction.
In space, no one can hear you podcast.
So welcome back to another episode of Bury Our Bones with Cinema. As I said in the intro, once again joined by Simon Keet. He obviously enjoyed doing Mortal Kombat so much, he thought, let's come back for another one.
Yeah, as long as it's got volcanoes in.
Well, luckily for you and luckily for the listeners, we are covering Dante's Peak, which obviously does include a volcano.
Peak Brosnan. Peak Brosnan.
Peak Brosnan. Well, I mean, it is one of those films that I think gets forgotten about a fair bit.
Not for me, because it was always on telly, and that's probably why I've even done this, because I don't remember having this on any DVD or VHS. And it wasn't in the house, I don't think so, but it must have been on telly the time.
Yeah, I think it was one of those ones that was on an ITV weekday film or something during the summer. I definitely remember watching it with my dad. Yeah. For some reason, my mum might have been at work, which is why I don't remember her being there. She's probably listening to that and go, of course he don't remember me. But so I, again, think probably watched it similar to you on TV. And because this was your suggestion, it was really strange that you suggested it, because I'd literally just brought the Blu-ray, because I looked at it and thought, do you know what I haven't watched in ages? Dante's bloody Peak. And I suppose the reason why I say it's one that gets forgotten about is probably because it's often talked about, obviously, in the same sense as Volcano, the film with Tommy Lee Jones. And I always thought that people liked that one more, but since doing a bit of research, it turns out they don't. But that tends to be the more popular one in terms of, if you think of a Volcano film, you're probably going to be thinking about Volcano rather than Dante's Peak.
Maybe it's in the title.
Probably that, you know. I think that kind of sums up the difference between Dante's Peak and Volcano, is that Dante's Peak is... It is a bit over the top in places, don't get me wrong, but it's very much a much more subtle affair compared to Volcano. Have you seen Volcano?
Yeah, not for a while, but I feel like
it's like Dante's
Peak. A lot
Peak
of lava in the city.
Yeah, Dante's Peak on steroids, and they don't worry about a silly little thing called logic or, you know, anything like that. It's a very much, even though this is a Hollywood film, Dante's Peak, Volcano is like the epitome of Hollywood. In the sense of it takes place in LA, in the middle of LA, you know, and Volcano just comes up out of nowhere, and everything is over the top, everything is to the nth degree. So yeah, I mean, we've kind of gone over what Dante's Peak might be about, but for those who want to hear the plot, so volcanologist Harry Dalton and Mayor Rachel Wando of Dante's Peak tried to convince the city council and the other volcanologists that a volcano right above Dante's Peak is indeed dangerous. People's safety is being set against economic interests.
Ooh.
Which is all you need for a good old disaster movie, isn't it?
So, one thing I didn't remember about this movie is the opening sequence.
It's horrific, isn't it?
It's horrific.
It's like, ease us in for Christ's sake. But it's like proper straight away, like...
So in the midst of a volcano explosion, sort of, isn't it? All the fallout's coming down. I don't know what you call it, the pyroslust.
Yeah, they do say it in there, but I'm not going to hold you accountable for the correct terminology.
But in the opening sequence, we do know that Piers Brosnan is in a relationship with this lady he calls Sweetheart.
Don't know if that's her full name.
No, but in the car, he goes, come on, we'll get out of here, sweetheart, or something like that. I was like, oh, okay, that's it.
In his kind of slightly Irish-American voice.
Yeah, what is that? Yeah, his Piers Brosnan special.
Yeah. You know what you're getting with Piers Brosnan. But very, very early on, you see some, like, I mean, kind of what you want to see from a volcano movie. You see danger and disaster. I wasn't quite expecting, because that was the bit that I'd totally forgotten about. It's weird what you remember from films when you've seen them when you were younger, because I'd totally forgotten about that. And the bit where I was like, oh, well, she must die then, because she's not obviously Linda Hamilton, so, because I couldn't... But the bit where the rock comes through the top of the car and hits her in the head, it's absolutely brutal. It's just like, oh, okay, this is straight in with the action, no mucking around. It's
a sign of things to come. Like, how late do you need to stay at an eruption? Like, what are you doing at that point? What are you testing? Like, what are you doing? Like, when it's raining down on you, what are you picking up?
I mean, it's very hot. It's very warm. I mean, it's quite a common theme, I feel like, through this episode is actually going to be... It's actually quite accurate in terms of the scientific stuff.
Ooh, okay.
So, I'm thinking that again, that similar sort of wavelength guy. Well, why are you still there? What are you doing?
Yeah.
But obviously people do it because that's how we find out about this stuff. The only way you really can get the only real way you can test how hot lava gets is if you test it when it's hot. So you have to be relatively close to it, whatever it may be. That's just an example. So, and I think that's kind of a lot of the science stuff is fairly accurate.
The director was a bit into the old rocks,
he studied geology at university, so he could have been a geologist, but he decided to go into movie making, which I think is the more profitable, I would say, of the two ventures.
I'm starting this, I realise I know nothing about this subject.
Well, I don't think we need to know anything about this subject. I think that's the good thing about Dante's Peak, actually, is that you don't feel like because inevitably a lot of the dialogue with these films, when you think about Volcano or some of the other disaster films, it's always going to have a quite a big chunk of exposition, because people kind of want to know why something's happening in nature and go, okay, well, why is that volcano erupting? What's happening there? Why are they up a volcano doing this? Why are they doing... You kind of need to know that. So that element is always going to be, it's just, I suppose, it's how it's delivered in what makes it good and what makes it bad. So it's as I say, I was funny what you remember, because the first thing I think of when I think of Dante's Peak isn't the big volcano, isn't Pierce Brosnan, isn't Linda Hamilton, isn't any of the things that you'd think it would be. I immediately think of the scene where he's driving across the river in his car and he's got the exhaust that comes out over the bonnet. That's the first thing I think of every single time, and I'll tell you for why. Because I remember watching it with my dad, as I said earlier, and my dad's a mechanic, and he likes to pick holes in things sometimes, so... Every now and again, we'd be watching a film and he'd often say, well, that's actually the wrong front grille for that car. That's actually from a 72 Granada, and this is 71, for example, which people won't know and won't care about. So I remember watching that scene happening, and me thinking, as probably, again, 8, 9 or 10-year-old, thinking, oh, that makes sense. He's got an exhaust on top of the car, which is why he's able to go through water. And my dad goes, you're going to need more than that to get across there. That's not how cars work. And I'm just like, you've just shattered that illusion for me now, Dad.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that's what I remember from it, which is, again, such an odd thing to kind of pick out, because I should really be remembering the eruption of the volcano, or,
For me, it's not. I don't want to skip to the end of the movie, but the bit I remember is, what's the? I don't know if have you ever been deep sea fishing? Have you ever been deep sea fishing or whatever that? Like, I think for me it was because, I think I remember Mum going like, why that? Out of anything, I feel like he just thought of that at the top of his head just to make the children happy. Anyway, that's the bit I remember for some reason. Have you ever been deep sea fishing? And the whole cave bit, I don't know why.
It's just funny what you end up remembering, isn't it? So obviously, as I kind of said, it naturally will get compared quite a lot to Volcano. Because they are essentially the same film. I can't think of any other what I would call mainstream volcano movies other than Volcano and Dante's Peak. It's strange. I can't.
Pompeii.
Yeah, but that's
it's not a good one. I watched that by myself in the cinema because my family had tickets to go see my brother play in something, and I think they didn't have a ticket for me, so I was like, okay, I'll go to the cinema, and I watched Pompeii.
Wow.
The one with Kit Harington or something?
Yeah. Which is weird because I don't consider that a volcano movie, and it's like the quintessential volcano.
Yeah, but
anybody who's mentioned a volcano often goes, it's a bit like Pompeii.
Yeah.
So
it does another thing, it does a 4 years later, I think. Is it 4 years?
Yeah, that's the gap between when his, what I presume is his girlfriend or wife.
And they hire him on a mission. Yeah, we need our best man.
Yeah, he's on holiday and he's doing an obscene amount of press-ups on his holiday.
And he doesn't stop his press-ups for the phone call.
No.
That's the kind of man he is, which I don't...
It never really crops up anywhere else, does it? He's like, I've started a job, so I'm going to finish the job, It's a bit like Mastermind. But yeah, so it does that usual 4 years later, which is an old Hollywood trick in it to get you to pass time without having to see it, So if we look at the old budget and the box office figures, so it's interesting because I'm going to keep mentioning Volcano because it's quite hard not to talk about those two in kind of tandem, really. I always thought that Volcano was like the big Hollywood version of Dante's Peak. That's what it seems like to me. It's the bigger budget, not necessarily bigger names, but just slightly more in your face and slightly less subtle. But looking at the figures, actually, Dante's Peak had a much bigger budget. So it was made on a very large budget of $116 million, which in 1997, in February 97, when this was made, you're looking at just shy of $230 million today, which puts you into summer blockbuster territory, which obviously it is a summer, well, I say summer blockbuster, but it came out in February, but it's in that territory of big budget affair that comes out in the summer, that is, shows off all the special effects, big names, bigger action, those types of things. So very firmly in that category. And there would have been a lot of clenched fists and a lot of sweaty foreheads when they got the opening weekend figures back. Because from $116 million, do you want to hazard a guess how much they made in the opening weekend?
I don't know.
Just shy of $20 million in the opening weekend. So we always say this, but figures that aren't to be sniffed at, I'd quite like $20 million in my bank account. But in terms of movies, that's when you've spent 116 or, best part of over 100 million, you want to see a bit more of a return than that in your opening weekend. And domestically, it didn't get much better. It made just $67 million, which domestically is you've lost money, and that's before you factor in things like marketing schedules and all of those sorts of things. Just to jump it back to the Mortal Kombat episode we done not so long ago, that made $70 million.
Yeah.
On a $15 to $20 million budget.
What disaster movies had come out before then, and what ones hadn't come out? Like, when was Titanic?
Titanic was 97.
And when was this?
This was 97. So it was in the...
Oh, God. Maybe people were just disastered out.
I think Titanic probably was summer 97, I would have thought.
Maybe people hadn't realised how good a disaster movie can be.
But this kind of harkens back to those 70s kind of disaster movies. You know, I'm thinking like Tower and Inferno, that kind of film, in that it's very, very similar. And I think, you know, those were kind of a staple part of the 70s kind of, you know, 70s Hollywood schedule. But, you know, if you're spending 116 million and you only get just shy of 70 million back domestically, it's not posing very well. And I'm guessing they would have been like, we have to make money worldwide, we have to get a good return. Luckily they did. They made $178 million worldwide. So, you know, they've made money, but perhaps not as much money as they would have liked. You know, if you're spending 120 million thereabouts, you kind of want to double that at least, I would have thought. But if we were to compare that with Volcano's figures, so as I said, I thought Volcano was the more big budget affair. So Volcano came out slightly later as well. This came out April time. Volcano came out because Dante's Peak were naturally going, we're going to get compared to Volcano. We're going to try and, you know, do the schedule a little bit quicker so they get in first, because ultimately, even if the quality is better of the other film, if you get in there first, the other film's to copy. Do you know what I mean? It's never, nobody remembers second place, everybody remembers first place. It's that thing of going, even if you were making your film and it was made before but it came out afterwards, it's always, that's the copy, you know.
You think all these people know each other? Like, why? Is it on purpose? You know, like, what is the crack with that?
I think there's probably an element of Dante's Peak perhaps was a slightly more straightforward production. Without looking in depth into Volcano, I wouldn't necessarily know, but I would have thought if they were able to, you know, rush production, generally speaking, that probably means you haven't got as many problems going on. So that's my thinking there. Or Volcano were just a little bit arrogant and going, we'll be fine. So Volcano was made on a budget of 90 million, so just shy of 30 million less. And it made in its opening weekend 14 million in its opening weekend, so even worse than Dante's Peak. And, you know, I think perhaps by the time Volcano came out, people were like, well, we've already seen Dante's Peak, why do we need to go and see Volcano? Because they're essentially the same movie. Yeah,
I wonder who got paid more, Tommy Lee Jones or Pierce Brosnan?
Well, Pierce Brosnan had only just been cast as Bond. It was just, I think it was in between GoldenEye and Tomorrow Never Dies. So if you'd have cast him potentially after Tomorrow Never Dies, you know, and before World Is Not Enough, where you've got a couple of Bond films under your belt, you could probably get a bigger fee. At that point, I'm not saying he wasn't proven, but at that point, he wasn't perhaps what he became slightly later on. So, and Tommy Lee Jones by that point was a big star, big star. So, still is. Stumbling over my words now. So the gross for Volcano was 49 million domestically, and then worldwide was 122 million. So they made profit, but I would have thought that if you'd have released one Volcano movie that year, both of these figures would probably be a lot higher, I would have thought, because if you're a fan of, say, Tommy Lee Jones, you're going to go, well, I'm not going to go and see Dante's Peak because I'm going to go and see Volcano when it comes out. You may do that. And vice versa. If you go, well, why would I go see Volcano? I've seen Dante's Peak and it's just the same as that. I know that I do that. I go, why have they done that? They've only literally, like, when I see a Liam Neeson type film.
Sort of opposite of like Oppen Barbieheimer or whatever.
Yeah, it's like the same
like just Barbie.
If they'd done a Barbie movie and then at the same time that they done, you'd be like, oh, well,
action man.
You know, similar with those like Taken style movies where, you know, I say Taken kind of was a big resurgence for Liam Neeson, and now he just does other versions of Taken but in different situations, like Taken on a train, Taken on this, Taken on that, you know. So I can kind of understand that. But getting onto the actual film itself, so
she was called Mary. Forget the reading, Mary. You know, like
that's not a bad impression of Pierce.
Are you
Brosnan,
joking?
actually.
I wasn't even. I'll never be able to do it again.
No. Oh yeah. It's a one-off.
Yeah.
But I was. If I closed my eyes, I wouldn't be in the room with Pierce Brosnan, but I'd be in the next room.
Timothy Dalton.
And he's called Harry Dalton.
I know, that's what I thought.
Little nod to Bond there.
I was thinking when he comes in, he's a bit of a Sam Neill, Jurassic Park kind of guy, merged with the other one, Jeff Goldblum.
Yeah.
So you got to smash together those two, and you get Pierce Brosnan in this. Maybe not.
Yeah, he comes across as a little bit of a maverick, doesn't he?
Yeah,
he's got that, and as we know from that opening sequence, for good cause, because he's lost people. So he's not as shy as going, you know, calling a spade a spade. He's not gonna, you know, and that could be to a fault, you know.
But it's been 4 years, and it's just enough time for someone to move on emotionally, which
he does move on. He moves on to Sarah Connor himself, Linda Hamilton, which is, to be honest, probably the only other Linda Hamilton movie of note that I can really pick out and go, oh yeah, Linda Hamilton is in Terminator 2, Terminator, and Dante's Peak.
Volcano. Yeah, Dante's Peak.
You know. Oh, I see what you've done there.
Yeah, I think... And she's great in this, I think.
She plays that role very, very well, isn't it? It's very understated. It doesn't need to be... What's good about it is, because you could quite easily have this, is... A big pet peeve of mine is when you see female characters and they're only there to scream. Yeah. Some films that works. In this film, it probably would be okay, because naturally you're going to be a bit scared running away from, you know, a massive ash cloud or an explosive volcano. But she's not that. She's
not the lady in Temple of Doom.
No. Yeah. Perfect example, yeah. She could be that, but she's not that. Yeah.
The snakes!
You know, that kind of scream all the time.
What is the Dante's Peak Town? What? Okay, yeah, we're on Linda Hamilton. So she's runs a coffee shop.
And the mayor.
She's the mayor, and she's a mum, single mum.
And also, she happens to be running away from a volcano. She's got enough plates to spin, and then a volcano decides to erupt in her town. She doesn't get much luck, does she?
No.
You know, I quite like her character. I think, as I say, I think it's kind of quintessential from the outside anyway, of those kind of small American towns, middle America, and very much, you know, those towns are, you know, 10 a dozen, that sort of thing. And it, you know, the first thing I thought of when they go to that town, which was actually filmed in Wallace, Idaho.
Nice.
And the first thing I thought of was that, that seems like a place that I'd want to go and live. Like, that seems like a really nice, picturesque place.
What me and Christina said, because we watch a lot of Gilmore Girls at the moment. You ever watched that?
I haven't, no.
It's honestly like that town. Yeah, and it looks amazing.
And that's the thing. I think those towns are up and down America, wherever you go. Those very kind of... I'm not going to say run down, but they're like a town in the middle of nowhere. And everything goes through that town. Like, that's where you've got one post office, you've got one grocery shop, you've got one hardware store, you've got, you know, all the things you need, but not much else, you know. And, you know, to have that, because that ultimately builds a little bit of kind of like sympathy. Like, I think that, to be honest, this is going to sound really, really like harsh on LA, but because it's happening in LA, and LA is its own kind of thing and it's its own environment.
Oh, in Volcano?
Yeah. it doesn't have that same kind of like, oh no, it's happening to this small little town. That's all they've got. You know what I mean? Where in LA, it's like, oh, well, they'll pick it up because it's LA.
I don't know if you could pick it up after that. After not the Dante's Peak one though, is like. I mean, I haven't seen Volcano in a while. I remember there just being more lava in Volcano.
Yeah, a lot of lava in Volcano. There's like a whole bit. Fair. Yeah, there's like a whole bit with like. But do you know what I mean? It has that like it's going to be a lot harder for that small town to recover than it will be for LA. You know, it's that thing of going, well, we don't want it to happen to that. It's almost a character in itself because you're going, I don't want it to happen to that town because that town's really nice, and not that LA's horrible. But
what do you think about the horror scene in the? There's those like, hey babe, just in the hot springs or whatever.
I'd say that's like the only thing that feels a little bit like that was made by somebody who thought they were making a different film.
Yeah.
Because it does feel very much like that's the start of a slasher movie.
It's such a trope as well, isn't it? Yeah. It is the most... You know, it's just like, I don't know. I didn't write down what they said, but it is so on the nose. Insert that scene into any other movie.
Especially horror movies. You go, oh, well, no wonder they're going to die because they've decided to be a bit promiscuous.
Yeah.
You know, of course they're going to die. That's what happens, you know.
But why is that in here? That's not the message of promiscuous.
I mean, I suppose it's
boiling.
I think it's there as a plot point to drive it forward as another piece of evidence that could be due to one thing, but Harry Dalton is saying, no, this is because of that, you know.
Was that boiling water, or was that weird acidic water that I didn't really realise until watching it this time?
I think it was the acidic water.
Okay, yeah.
But yeah, I know what you mean. Like, that is like a very common trope that happens in there. And as I was saying, I do think it feels a little bit out of place, just in the way that it's shot, like the dramatic music over the top. It does feel like the start of a horror film, as I was kind of saying earlier. But I think those kind of moments where it feels over the top and out of place are very few and far between.
Agreed, yeah.
Like, I remember watching it before I watched Volcano and thinking, even when I watched it for the first time, I remember thinking it was like big action set pieces, which it is, and thinking it's at various points, because I think when I first watched it, I was like 10 or 11 or something like that. Then I watched it probably in my teens, and when I watched it in my teens, I remember thinking, oh, this is a bit far-fetched, a bit over the top. Having since then watched Volcano, I'm going, oh no, that's really grounded, because Volcano takes it to a bit of another level and not in a good way. But as I said in the beginning, a lot of the stuff that happens is actually like quite accurate to like science and geology. Because as we said, Roger Donaldson studied geology at university, so he was quite adamant that he wanted those kind of things to stay like accurate. And I think it benefits from that, even though there were points where I'm going, well, that would never happen, and then do a bit of research and you go, oh no, that actually does happen. Like the thing that I thought was when it first erupts and it, you know, the sky is covered in that ash cloud and then it starts having thunder and lightning. I'm looking at that and I'm going, oh yeah, because it would start thundering and lightning, wouldn't it? But apparently that does happen because of all the static electricity in the ash cloud and stuff like that. So I'm just like, oh, I stand corrected then, you know. I might be wrong, but I think I read somewhere they used wrote like bits of newspaper to do the. Did you? Yeah, it was it was really funny because there was a documentary I watched where they spoke with obviously the filmmakers and that, and they used not only Roger Donaldson with his own experience, they actually got some volcanologists as well as like advisors. And there's one volcanologist, and I can't remember his name, but there's a point where he's definitely hinting that he suggested to the crew that they use real ash, like, and I'm just like, I don't think he's ever worked on a film before, because one, how do you get enough ash to simulate and make it look authentic like a volcano without erupting a volcano? And two, surely that's not going to be particularly healthy for everybody, just to be breathing in ash and getting molten ash
reminds
stuff.
Me a bit of that Wizard of Oz story with the snow.
Yeah, well, they had asbestos in the snow and that. Like, having real ash from a volcano isn't going to be very good. But he was, thankfully for everybody on board, convinced to not use real ash, and they used a newspaper like composite, which was basically, in layman's terms, very finely cut up newspaper that simulated the ash, and that, you know, and it does actually create that amazing effect. That scene after it's first erupted, not with lava but with that ash cloud, and they go back through the town and it's covered. That scene is like, it's, you know, that is like, it's like a ghost town naturally. And it's like, and they actually really done that. So the actual town they got is a place called Wallace, Idaho, and they were saying that a lot of the shop fronts, because it was an old town that had fallen on hard times, they made a lot of shop fronts in the actual town. They basically said there will be shots where we're going to spray this newspaper stuff to look like ash, and they covered the whole town in that ash. And some residents were like, hey, it's fine, they're making a movie, that's great for us, we get more money coming to us because it's in a movie. And there's other people going, I can't go to the post office, you know, which kind of makes sense. But it's just, I think those tiny things where you actually, but it benefits it because you can see that it's actually there. It's not on a green screen, it's not, you know, on a sound stage. You can tell it's actually there. They've actually used that. And I think with a big budget disaster movie, those elements need to be really on point, because if the eruption looks rubbish, that's your movie gone. You know what I mean? If the destruction of everything looks rubbish, your movie's gone. So
there's probably one. This movie feels like it's almost like a tech demo in places, doesn't it? You know, it's so, there's really amazing set pieces, and it all, like you say, has a real realist. It feels quite, the effects generally look quite realistic. And there's probably, I won't say it yet, but there is one part where the like, there's one scene in particular where I feel like I'm like, oh my, you know, CGI or whatever, you know.
And I think that's probably age more than anything. That's part and parcel of, you know, it's the age-old thing that we always talk about on the podcast about, you know, CGI versus practical effects. But that's natural, but it never feels like, as I say, it never detracts from it. And I think they do a good blend of practical visual effects and then special effects on top. Yeah. So,
what do you think about? So they're all like the ragtag team. You know, like, I know the movie knows a lot about, like you're saying, the movie knows a lot about the, you know, director seems to know his stuff. Do you ever really get the impression that the ragtag team of, like, volcanologists, do you feel like they know what's going on? Because I get the impression they just don't. Like, they're all just there, and they never, I guess it's good really, so they don't say a load of big words, and they're not trying to always explain exactly what's happening, like the volcano does all the sort of,
they're kind of a lot more reactive, aren't they?
Yeah,
it's more, because I think it's that thing of, and I don't know because I'm not a volcanologist, but
is that the right word?
Yeah, that's the right word. Yeah, I'm not just making shit up now.
no, I think
on, you know, even you may know the ins and outs of a volcano and how it works and everything. When it actually happens in front of you, you're probably not going to be like, well, oh, that's actually this kind of thing, and da 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 da. You're probably going to be thinking, shit, I need to get out of it. We need to run, that kind of thing. So I like that about them, because they kind of do know what they're talking about in small instances. But when it's all like not being funny, there isn't any scenes where people are running for their life and they're going, but wait, it's not, it's a magtemic, blah, 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 blah. Yeah. And then they're explaining it. There isn't really much of that, which I feel like there is in Volcano.
You just reminded me of the scene where he goes, that's not...
that's not tectonic, it's magmatic, or whatever it is. But that's fine, because they're not running away from anything. They're just trying to convince, to put a red alert on. But if that was happening, which I feel like happens a lot in disaster, if that's happening when people are running for their life, it's a bit like, come on, like, run for your life, or, you know. So I kind of I can let that slide a little bit.
He goes there, and they're like, he's having a nice day in he goes to that horrible acidic pool, and those horror kids have got promiscuous and paid the ultimate price.
Yeah.
Everyone pays in horror movies.
They had it coming,
for some reason. For some reason, they had it coming in this movie too. So, and he's there to do his job, but he's got his captain busting his ass, which is another trope of like...
Yeah, it's very much... there's always that kind of that friction between the person who's experienced this stuff and who knows what they're talking about, and then there's the bureaucrat kind of going, well, actually, I think you're fine. It's not quite as simple as that, which is a common trope. But I suppose that would be kind of like the first thing I was thinking is when they're having that first town meeting before his boss arrives, and there's the guy going, look, if this guy gets wind of it, he's going to take his cash injection and go to some other town. I'm thinking it's a bit corny, but that actually is probably happening in those towns. They're probably thinking we can't have a big disaster like this because we're not going to get the funding that we need, because who's going to want to fund a cash-ridden, volcano-ridden town? So I said to Hannah, which I will get onto her first, when I told her we're watching Dante's Peak, I'll tell you what she thought the film was about, which just, I don't know how she got to that point. I was saying to her, I was like, this probably does happen in these towns. Like, these council meetings is probably exactly what happens. So it may feel a bit like a trope and a bit corny, but it's probably there for a reason, because otherwise, if everybody just goes, oh, yeah, totally right, let's close it all down, and then it just goes straight into the action. There's no kind of like suspense, because everybody who comes to watch Dante's Peak or any disaster film is going to be going, I want to watch stuff blow up. I want to watch those big set pieces. If you give that to them straight away, how do you sustain a 2-hour movie? You just have to keep topping it and topping it and topping it, and eventually it gets to a point where you can't really top it anymore. So I think it's good to have those elements in there before you actually get to the nuts and bolts of why you're actually there watching the film in the cinema or at home or whatever it may be.
And the scene I found quite fun was when so the captain said, you need a vacation, even though he's just had one or something.
I was on vacation, actually. You gave me a call and said, I need you on this job.
But I'm your best man.
Yeah.
I can't see, it's gone. But he goes to the bar. Like, so not really to drown his sorrows, but he already knows the barman, which makes me he's like, or maybe it's not. Maybe he's been there a few days at that point, actually. But he goes in the bar and he's sort of on first name terms with the barman, as you would in a small town. I guess actually makes sense.
And you kind of get the inclination that he's been in many bars like that through his time. Like, he's like, here I am again, not being listened to. This is what happened when that time happened, when wherever they were. It does say where they were.
Yeah, it does
in the opening, but I can't remember it for the life of me.
Indonesia or something?
Somewhere like that. I imagine he probably was doing the same thing. But as I said,
Hannah.
So when I said, I was like, oh, Simon's picked Dante's Peak, we're going to do an episode on that. She was like, oh, okay. I was like, look, Hannah's not really into movies unless it's got somebody... Well, she is into movies, but not what I call good movies. They're often like... If she's got somebody she likes in it, then she'll watch it regardless of the quality of it, because she likes that person. And then she likes the odd kind of action film or the odd kind of thing that I enjoy. But generally speaking, so I said to her, we're going to be doing Mortal Kombat, we're going to be doing Dante's Peak. I'm going to watch them over the weekend or at some point. Do you want to watch them with me? And if so, which one do you want to watch? Or do you want to watch both? And she's like, don't really want to watch Mortal Kombat, which I'm like, fair enough. Not really your thing. I was like, oh, Dante's Peak, I'll watch Dante's Peak. And that kind of shocks me, because I was like, why does she want to watch like a Hollywood disaster movie? That doesn't seem like in her wheelhouse. So I put it on the DVD, and that first scene happens, and she's just like, oh, this isn't what I thought it was going to be. And I was like, what did you think it was going to be? So I just thought it was going to be some nice little coming-of-age drama. And I'm like, how did you... I don't know. I just heard Dante's Peak, and I thought it was about somebody called Dante, So I'm like, fair enough. But yeah, so that just made me chuckle an awful lot.
Pierce Brosnan. I don't know. Is Pierce Brosnan a bit of a late bloomer in acting? Because I can't remember him in any.
He'd been in a fair bit, but he hadn't really got to where we know him to be. So he was in. So he was
Lawnmower Man.
He did Lawnmower Man in the early 90s. He was in a film called Nomads, where he plays an anthropologist with a weird French accent.
Wasn't he in like a spy thing in America? Like, wasn't he?
He was in Remington Steele.
Yeah, okay.
Which is where he basically, that's what got him the James Bond job. And for some people who are fans of James Bond, so he was originally supposed to come in to do James Bond when Timothy Dalton came in. So for License to Kill and The Living Daylights, he was supposed to come in at that point, but he couldn't get out of his contract with Remington Steele. They just renewed it for, I think, a third series, and they were like, we can't. No, you've signed a contract with us, we're not letting you out of it. So they recast they got Timothy Dalton in that thing, and it was only once Timothy Dalton had come out of it in, I think 91 was, I think, his last film, and they were going to recast, and then they cast him for GoldenEye in 96. So yeah, but he hadn't really, he was a bit like, I suppose, Tom Selleck at the time of Indiana Jones with Magnum PI. He was a TV name and he was a recognisable name, but he hadn't had that big film or that big thing to really push him into, until he got, and this was it, as I say, in between GoldenEye and Tomorrow Never Dies. So he'd got that break, but it wasn't quite, it's not Timothy Dalton. It wasn't Pierce Brosnan of, say, 2000 or 2002 post all of his Bond movies. So yeah, and I think he's a great bit of cast in there. Yeah,
I mean, in that bar, I'm no longer thinking of him as James Bond, which is quite hard for me because that's what I know about Pierce Brosnan.
He's our era of Bond, isn't he?
So he'll always be James Bond. But when he's in that bars, I think why it veers away from James Bond, especially around wherever we got up to with this one, like around that bar bit with he's just starting to fall in love with Linda Hamilton and that. It's that relationship. It's seeing his warmth towards a woman and it not be like a Bond girl. Like, she's quite, I would say normal, but she's not normal. She's like a mayor and she runs a coffee shop and she buys them all coffee and stuff. I like that. But it's that, I think the warmth with those two is actually quite, I think that maybe makes it un-Bondy.
Yeah, I think she's much more, it's going to sound, I don't want this to sound sexist or misogynistic at all, but she's a lot more kind of normal looking for a woman. Like she's not supermodel type character who you see in James Bond. That's where true. James Bond, it's like, right, what supermodel or what glamour model, whatever it may be, can we get for James Bond? That's always been the thing. Whereas in this, she's a very much more normal looking woman, still a very pretty woman.
I don't know if he ever goes out of any mums in James Bond, actually, thinking about it.
If he does, it's definitely not explored as her being a mum.
No, I don't think so.
I mean, on that subject of that, I like that warmth and that relationship between them. There is like that really kind of clunky kind of dialogue when
There's clunky dialogues in this.
When they first meet, and it's like, I can't even remember what they say, but I remember it being really clunky because they both, in about space of about 15 seconds, both having a couple of lines each, they both happen to go through the whole relationship status. Yeah. Rather than it. And I was thinking as well, because I like the daughter in it. I like her character, the kind of, has no filter and kind of just says things straight away, and quite a confident character. You could have her ask that question. I think I've seen that in other things before, where the daughter is almost like auditioning the bloke.
I think in the car she does do that though.
Yeah, I think it's at that point, but before that point, there's that clunky dialogue where they're like, So I think Linda Hamilton says, "So, is there a Mrs. Dalton?" or something along those lines, or something like. It's just clunky. I remember that.
Do they go on a date at that point? You know, like when they're walking across the bridge. Like, what do they do that night?
She takes him out for dinner. He comes over for eggplant lasagna or something.
Yeah.
Do you eat eggplant lasagna or whatever it is?
Yeah.
Just to say thank you for coming and look at, making sure our town's all right, that sort of thing.
And then they get down to it after having a wine, and he's drinking more than her. That's what Christina noticed. Like, look, they've shown that he's drinking more. He's a faster drinker. He's more of a maverick. But he says I think they do it. Oh, God, I think they get down to the business, and then I don't know if after it or before. He says it's just like riding a bike.
It's I remember that because they don't end up doing it, but they're just about kissing, and I think for some reason, Linda Hamilton's character says it's been a long time for me, and he says me too, but it's just like riding a bike. You never forget. And then they just go into what looks like they're about to properly get down to business, and then he gets the phone call saying we've got some more seismic activity. So they never actually get to that point.
And doesn't the water start running?
Yeah, that's it. That's it. She pours him a water or something, and the water, but essentially they never get to that point. I think it does that good balancing act of having enough of that romance and that chemistry and that without it getting to a point where it feels like it's forced.
I just realised as well, I think I skipped ahead a bit, because I think the bit before all that is with that spider legs on the volcano. You know, the robot scene, which I think is worth... I feel like I want to know what you think about that whole bit. He's going off wire. It's so frustrating.
It's very, very kind of... It's like you know what's happening before it's happened. Like you just know. Like, I'm not leaving that down there, and it's like, well, you genuinely would leave that down there, and
how in the hell was that robot ever going to make it down a volcano anyway? It's like walking like
crab walking, isn't it?
Yeah, it's not. There's no way it could have got down to like the third of the mountain. You know, it couldn't have got to the distance it already got to without just rolling down the hill.
It kind of reminds me of that scene in Friends where Joey is just got a part in a TV show where he has a robot sidekick, and in his mind it's like Terminator type robot, and then the robot comes on and it's this like little kind of like horrible awkward thing. Like if they'd have said, oh, we've got this really high tech equipment called what do they call it again?
Spider legs.
I realised you just said that and I'd completely forgotten. We've got this really high tech equipment that will capture everything called spider legs, and then it comes on and you're like, oh, it literally is like a massive rubbish robotic spider. And but the problem is that elf thing that the NASA put on it.
Oh yeah.
It's and I'm like, for a fact that is going to have some form of that's going to crop up again, because it's like, why would you even mention that?
When I was watching it, I was just totally was like, why are you talking about that elf thing? I don't know if I was a bit tired or something, but that's so obvious it's going to come up again.
I'm just like, why have they focused so much on that when they're just going to throw it away?
It's a stupid elf NASA thing. I like that it's not explained too much, like the elf NASA thing. It just is there.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't need to be explained. You just know, NASA are tracking it. That's all you need to know. Yeah. Which is actually, when you get to why it's used in the end, it's kind of like, and perfect, isn't it?
When that guy's in hospital, because obviously it erupts as a helicopter pickup and stuff,
with some really shoehorned in tension with the helicopter driver. First thing I thought of was like, that helicopter driver would not renegotiate his fee at that point. No. And if he was, he would never get another job ever again, because it's just like, there's somebody injured on top of a volcano. It's like, yeah, but what about my fee?
Well, he wants to negotiate his rates.
And they do like a really like dramatic like zoom in at the guy who's on the phone to the helicopter driver. It's like, he really wants to negotiate his rates. It's like just so over the top there.
But when they're in hospital afterwards, another corker of a line, I thought, it's It's the boiled frogs line. I think that's where he says it. You know, he just says...
It's quite a common line that crops up now, isn't it? And I think a lot of people... I think people started to think that was like an urban myth, but apparently it does actually happen with that.
Can you say it, Ryan?
So it's a bit like boiled... it's a bit like boiled... It's a bit like frogs in a pan of boiling water. Slowly heat it up, and they I'm fucking this up slightly, aren't I?
You're all right.
So yeah, you put a frog in boiling water, he jumps straight out. Put a frog in cold water and slowly heat it up. They don't notice the change, and they stay in there and die.
Because he's saying that, I think, to his geologist
He's saying to
mate.
his boss, it's basically like if we'd have got... Yeah, that's his point. If we'd have got here today and that had happened, we would be closing everything off. But because it's happened when we've been here for 2 days and we've seen slowly increasing, we're not picking up on that. So
you know what it is? I don't think that is now you're saying it, that all is fine to me. I think it's just when Pierce Brosnan says stuff. Do you know what I mean? For me, it's like, I don't know, it doesn't always hit... It always feels like I'm watching a Pierce Brosnan movie, actually. I know I just said earlier that it's not like James Bond, but maybe
that feels like a James Bond thing to say, doesn't it?
Oh, yeah, fair.
I think that's where it is. It feels very much like James Bond is saying that pithy one-liner or that.
Yeah.
He's saying that thing, and it's, again, soundbite type thing.
I believe that the casting of Anthony Hopkins in the role of Dr. Fraser Crane will go down in history as one of the great casting mistakes of the last century. Who do we have on line 1, Roz? On line 1, we have Bill from Buffalo. He's just not feeling himself. Well, hello, Bill. I'm listening. Yes, Dr. Crane. I would just like to know, would you me? Would you me real hard?
Exclusively only on Orangutan Records, Jake Fratelli sings the classics. The standout.
But if we were to look at the crew who made the film, so obviously Roger Donaldson directed the film, and might be interested to know that he had worked on Species prior to that in 95, which is a good little film. No Way Out in 87 with Kevin Costner, and The Bounty with Anthony Hopkins and Mel Gibson in 1984. So by that point, very well established director from New Zealand and a geologist, as we mentioned earlier. We got Leslie Boehm, who wrote the script, who probably their most notable other work was A Nightmare on Elm Street 5, The Dream Child, which is a little bit of a favourite of mine. I do like the Nightmare on Elm Street series. We have Gail Ann Hurd as the producer, who produced The Terminator, Aliens, Armageddon, works a lot with James Cameron, so a big name in the producing circle. She was helped along with the producing by Joseph Singer, who'd worked previously on Courage Under Fire and Mercury Rising in 98, slightly later. We have the composer was John Frizzle, who'd worked on Alien Resurrection. The cinematographer, which I think is an important part of a disaster movie, is the cinematographer, because you've got to get those dramatic wide shots and those big set pieces. You've got to get those filmed properly. So having a good director of photography is really important. That was Andrzej Barkowiak, who had worked previously on Speed, which is a good film.
That is a great movie. Romeo
Must Die with Jet Li, Exit Wounds, which is Steven Seagal. Okay. Edited by Conrad Buff, Tina Hirsch and Howard E. Smith, who had all kind of worked on various things like The Abyss, Terminator 2. Casting director was Alison Cowett and Mike Fenton, and then J. Dennis Washington as the production designer. So, I mean, looking at that whole host of filmmakers there, everybody is very well established in their own right. You know, probably the most experienced, or the most, maybe not the most well known, but certainly the person who worked on, say, the biggest budget films. Is you're looking at Gale Anne Hurd, who'd worked on Terminator 2, Aliens, Armageddon. So really, really, you know, adverse and well versed in big budget spectacles like this. And I think it really comes across in the actual filmmaking aspect of the film.
Yeah, like
a lot of the camera trickery that's used and a lot of the set pieces is done really, really well. So perhaps most notably, you know that scene where they're all on the exit pike on the highway,
on the bridge,
and it no, not the bridge, not the dam, but all the cars are going up to try and join the highway.
Oh yeah, so what is how they make that?
Yeah, I mean, it's partially a miniature and partially...
But big miniatures, massive miniatures.
Oh yeah, that's kind of a bit of an oxymoron. Yeah. Big miniature. But yeah, a miniature. Partially they actually filmed a section falling down, and then partial green screen as well. And
the green screen is massive.
Oh yeah, huge and
so
huge.
Cool.
Yeah.
They had it up by crane.
And I think it's that, you know, that element of, you know, mixing all of those kind of things and not just having one thing, not just doing it all with CGI or not just doing it all with practical effects. It's kind of going, we can get the most out of each kind of practice to create the best effect. And I think on the whole, the special effects, visual effects, the set pieces land really, really well.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, to be honest. I mean, maybe I should just say the one bit I feel doesn't then. It's not really because of the actual special effects. I think it's just because of the timing of when it happens. It's when they're in the house saving Ruth, and and then the windows smash open. It's just loads lava comes through the window or something, and it's that scene. That's the one where like, oh my god! But then for a good like 5-10 minutes after that, it's like it really kicks off at that point. By the way, I'd like to know what you think about Ruth in general up to that point as well. But when it gets to that point, it's you're in Dante's Inferno. It feels like, because it really looks like a bit of a hellscape when by the time they're on the boat, which is another good bit. You know, like by the time they're on the boat, it really goes all back chaos. And you know, I guess it's kind of cool that lava comes through the window. But that's probably the bit that I'm just like, it almost feels like a different sort of land at that point. But I guess that's what they maybe wanted.
It's kind of the catalyst, isn't it? I think we see that first eruption and all the ash comes down, and then it goes a bit quiet and things seem to be okay. And there's that line from what's her name? Just trying to find her. From Arabella Field, who plays Nancy, and she goes, "We've got to go quick." She's just clearing her throat. She hasn't even started to sing yet. You know, in reference to the volcano erupting. And I think that's the point where they get to the house and it's all dark and it's all the ash is there, but it's relatively quiet. And then they think they're okay, and then all of a sudden, all of that lava comes in. I actually, again, thought that's really far-fetched. You'd be burnt alive even being that close to that stuff. And perhaps it is a little bit far-fetched with how it all comes in through the
house,
entire side of the house, which it would do. But by that point, it's probably flowing so fast you wouldn't be able to get out. But there's actually, when in the documentary that I watched, there's actually images of people like standing relatively close to that kind of light. It's not completely glowing red, but it's hot enough to still be moving. And they're like testing stuff and doing that. So it's not completely far-fetched. But I do understand what you mean. It is the kind of bit where it's a bit like, it feels very much like
I think it ups the ante. I mean, before that whole bit, there's that whole water bit that you said about, which I totally forgot about that scene because, my dad's not a mechanic, I guess. But that scene's great, actually. That's really tense.
Yeah, especially when you see the car. It's almost like Jaws.
It's very James Bond.
Yeah, but the way that you see the other car that's kind of just floating, and they're like, quickly, you got... And he's like there. And of course, he's always got a transmission problem. Of course, he's always trying to, but that's when it makes sense because you're in water.
There's a funny bit where the other car's coming, they're like, watch out for that car, and it's like coming really slowly. You go, but the only reason they're going up that mountain anyway is because of Ruth, and she is a character that has stuck with me over the years. Because if I think of, Dante's Peak, that she really does stand out as one of the, because she's kind of why they're stuck in it anyway.
Well, it's interesting you should say that, because one of the things that I picked out towards the end of the film was, and again, this is going to sound like I have no heart whatsoever, but everybody who dies of the kind of like named characters or people we actually see as a character and not an extra, everybody who dies kind of has not a justified reason for them dying, but there's a reason why they're dying. So, for example, like the boss, Charles, I think his name is, he dies because he didn't listen to Harry Dalton. You've got the guy who injects some money into the town and then pulls his funds. He dies in a helicopter because he done it in a mean way by going, I'm out of this town, and he kind of has it coming. The pilot dies because he tried to renegotiate his fee. Ruth, is it Ruth? I believe it is Ruth.
It's Ruth,
yeah, she dies because she was stubborn and didn't listen.
And do you know who dies? Those promiscuous teenagers, right?
And they all had it coming. They all deserve it. But that I think that's quite an interesting kind of thing of it being like, because it is sort of a family kind of disaster movie in the sense of you can probably all sit down and watch this and there's a happy ending. Nobody, I mean, there are some sadder bits, but generally speaking, it's a nice affair, and but it's almost like that thing of going, yeah, these people did die, but it's okay because of this reason,
Yeah, the roof. So the roof death used to bother me as a kid because it is something a nan would do. It's something about how that scene is shot that when I was a kid, it was very much like a Titanic raft situation. Like, just get on the raft, just get on those block of wood, Jack. I'm sure there's room. And I just think they're so close to that pontoon. Like, did she have to... It was always one of those things as a kid. I was like, oh, no, don't get out. And then she gets out and she doesn't just get out. She tries to pull the boat, but she goes like, whoa, whoa. She does like the most horrible really noise.
And that's only going to be amplified if that actually is your nan,
Yeah.
It's one of those things where it's not very nice. And actually, that kind of story of, somebody staying... in their home and refusing to leave when there's that thing. That is actually a true story.
Wow.
There was actually, I think it was Mount St. Helens when that erupted. I believe that's the name of the volcano. That actually happened. There was somebody who lived, and they were interviewed for the paper or something, and they were like, "Are you going to be evacuating from your home?" I was like, "No, I built this home." My grandfather built this home 100 years ago. It's been in the family ever since. I'm not leaving my home. I'm not worried. It's fine. Nothing's going to happen. And then literally ended up dying because he didn't.
Wow.
It's weird. So it is actually a relatively
I
true thing.
Her story, and the kids driving up to see her. There's this whole shebang with the crystal that gets passed on throughout the movie a couple of times.
I mean, that's a bit paper thin, if you ask me. It's a bit like...
Would you like my crystal? Okay.
It's like, no, I don't want your crystal. I just want to go home.
But Ruth did that. But before Ruth did that, there's the row boat scene on the the boat on the acid river.
Yeah, that's a bit sinister, isn't it?
So, was you getting like Willy Wonka vibes from the...
It was a bit sort of like, row.
And do you think Benny and Bjorn saw that and were like, that's the man we need in Mamma Mia?
Well, I was thinking, I bet he's got a set of pipes on him.
Yeah.
you know.
Row. I think with that scene is like, I don't know if I would sing that. Do you know what I mean? In that scenario, like they're trying to make it all happy, but it's so grim at that point.
I kind of get why it's there. He's just trying to comfort that. The kids aren't
creepy row
but
your boat.
There's probably better songs you can sing, and in a slightly less creepy way.
Yeah, row, and then like row, and then doing it in the canon, row your boat. You know, that's a great.
But that scene as a whole is filled with tension because you kind of know what's going to happen, just kind of straight away. You kind of know as soon as they get on there, it's not. You may not think it's going to be acid, but you're going to be like, I bet that's going to be boiling hot because all the lava's going in there.
And I always did till the other rewatch.
Yeah, and it's just that thing of like, it's very well done. And apparently, actually, that when they tried to film that, the actual boat actually started sinking, and Linda Hamilton was like saying that they were all in the boat and they were all like sinking, but Roger Donaldson was like looking through the camera and couldn't see that it was sinking, so he was just saying, no, Linda, you need to do this, and she was just like, the boat's sinking, I can't do that. So it's a little bit kind of art imitating life.
Wow. Well,
or the other way around even.
It is sad. I mean, when watching that as a younger kid, but that's a sad moment.
It sits with you, it's one of the things I remember is like, that, the nan dies. And I think when you're younger, you don't necessarily know you don't necessarily kind of pick up on all of the motivations and her not moving and why she's deciding not to leave and all of that. You don't really know why, you just know that it's happening, and it kind of does sit with you and being like, sad when that happens. So I kind of get that, but it brings us on quite nicely to the cast. So obviously, as we mentioned, we have the James Bond himself, Pierce Brosnan, playing Harry Dalton, which prior to this film, he had done, obviously, as we mentioned earlier, he'd done Remington Steele, he'd done Mrs. Doubtfire.
Oh, that's a good one.
Which for some reason, I thought that was post-Bond, but that's 93, so good 3 years before he ended up doing GoldenEye. He played James Bond. Sorry, James Bond was 95. GoldenEye was 95, sorry, I keep saying it's 96. He played James Bond from 95 to 2002. He was in Mamma Mia, Thomas Crown Affair in 99, and Mars Attacks by Tim Burton. That's a
great one.
That's a great film.
Yeah.
I think he's a great leading man, as probably is everybody we kind of already know from James Bond.
Yeah.
But sometimes you have that difficulty of, being so iconic for a particular character. When you go into other things, it's like, is that just a lesser version of that same character? Because that's why we've cast you. We want James Bond. We don't want Pierce Brosnan, you know what I mean? But on the whole, it doesn't feel like that here. So we obviously have Linda Hamilton playing Rachel Wando from the Terminator and Terminator 2. Playing Lauren Wando, which is the daughter of Linda Hamilton's character. We have Jamie Renee Smith. And the son is Jeremy Foley, who is like the spitting image for a young Joseph Gordon-Levitt. I was like, if you were to make that in an alternate universe, that would be Joseph Gordon-Levitt playing that.
Christina said that when we were watching it.
I literally thought for about 20 minutes seeing that kid, I was like, oh, it's Joseph Gordon-Levitt, and then I was like, oh no, it's not him, is it? But yeah, we have him playing Graham Wando. We have Charles Hallahan playing Paul Dreyfus, which is the
busting my ass.
Yeah, so I realised I called him Charles. That's his actor name. His name in this is Paul.
I like the quote of his that I like in this movie is "For what it's worth, you were right and I was wrong," or whatever. Do you remember that bit? Yeah. He's on the phone to him.
I do, yeah.
And then Pierce Brosnan just saying, just like, it's okay.
Yeah.
Which I like about that. I like him. He just said, it's okay.
Yeah. Most other films, you'd be like, damn it, I told you, this is all your fault, and there'd be that plot point. But just going, it's okay.
They're just like colleagues.
Yeah. And you may recognise him because he is in The Thing. John Carpenter's The Thing with Kurt Russell and Keith David. And he's that big... He's basically the guy who gets the alien that comes out of him, but not an alien. I can't really think what it's called, but the big kind of like big face on the end of the arm in The Thing. Fair. So we have Grant Heslov playing Greg, which is the I was trying to think
one of the team.
One of the team. It's not
he's in other stuff.
Yeah, he's been in films like Congo, True Lies, The Birdcage. Has become a fairly successful producer and director and writer in his own right. We've got Kirk Trutner playing Terry, which is the one who breaks his leg. He hasn't really done a lot. Nothing really of note, to be fair. This is kind of like his biggest project. People will mostly know him for. We've got Arabella Field playing Nancy, who people may recognise her from 1998's Godzilla and from National Treasure in 2004, but it's a very small role in that. We have Zimar playing Stan, who was also in Rush Hour, Rival by Denis Villeneuve, The Farewell in 2019, and we have Peter Jason playing Norman Gates, who is the guy we were talking about in Mortal Kombat episode as Master Boyd.
Ooh.
So his name is Peter Jason, who's been in 48 Hours, They Live, Mortal Kombat, Escape from LA.
I recognised him, but I just couldn't.
Yeah, recognisable name from that. So we could have very nearly had a bit of a different film with the lead role, because Pierce Brosnan wasn't always the first choice, although he did have a good working relationship with Roger Donaldson. So we could have had Michael Douglas playing Harry Dalton.
Yeah, I heard that and I thought, yeah, I would have liked that.
That could work. That would be. I think if you want to up the level of cool, we could have had Kurt Russell. I love Kurt Russell. I think him in pretty much anything works.
Because I feel like Pierce Brosnan is a lot of things. He ain't cool.
He's suave and he's confident.
I feel like he's just someone your mum fancies rather than
I don't think
Kurt Russell. You want to, wow. I wish he was saying.
Yeah. I feel like
he's great.
I feel like Mamma Mia didn't do too much for the cool factor of Pierce Brosnan. But yeah, Kurt Russell is, Pliskin in Escape from LA and Escape from New York. He's like the epitome of cool. You put him in there, and I feel like if you put Kurt Russell in there, the character becomes a much more of a maverick, even more so than he is already. I've told you before. Yeah, he's not a captain. I don't know where you're getting that from.
It would be funny to hear them all do that line about it's not something, it's magnamic. What's that?
That line. It's not tectonic, it's magnamic.
Yeah, because I feel like Michael Douglas and Kurt Russell be very different, and I feel like Pierce Brosnan sits somewhere in the middle. Yeah,
he's kind of
because he's a bit of that and he's a bit of this. He's like he's neither just like. He's neither just cool for cool's sake of like being a rogue geologist or volcanologist or whatever, and he's also, I feel like if it was Michael Douglas, you'd feel like he was more just really good at his job.
Yeah, I buy the scientist element more with Michael Douglas.
Yeah,
Kurt Russell, I think, is the walking charisma. He's probably the guy that I can see, as I say, being a bit more of a maverick. And the rest of the team not necessarily listening to him because he doesn't follow the science. He follows his head and his heart, that type of thing. Whereas I think Pierce Brosnan is somewhere in the middle of that.
Yeah.
But having said that, I think Pierce Brosnan is pretty decent in this role. I think the chemistry between the family, on the whole, is really quite good. I know there's that scene where I refer to it in the intro as a slightly dodgy magic trick, but that whole scene where he's showing them how to do, that little where he holds the napkin and then pulls the napkin and it looks like he's got an invisible hair and that thing. I mean, it's a bit ropey as a magic trick, but for kids and for that dynamic of showing he's good with kids, he could be, Linda Hamilton's character going, he's good with kids, he's a keeper. He can be a good father to my kids because the father had gone out, you'd left me a little while ago. And then they have that plot point at the end with Ruth saying he was a fool to leave you, and all of that. I'm like, I mean, I get that's.
But who was he?
Yeah.
I mean, the bit where they saved the dog, I think Ruth dies, and then the dog, and then they save the dog, and they go, "You're only going to get one chance at this."
Yeah.
And then the one chance pays off, obviously, and the dog jumps in. I quite like that bit.
The only thing I thought was a little bit was the overdramatic music of like it was almost like that was the end of the movie. Yeah. Everything's happy now. You can all go home. Really kind of like, happy moment type thing. I'm like, there's still another half an hour left and we haven't even really seen it erupt properly.
And around that time, it all starts to go wrong for the other people who haven't left yet, right?
Yeah,
There's... what's the captain? What's his name?
Paul.
Captain
Paul is his name.
Yeah,
Captain Paul.
Yeah, he has a scene, doesn't he, where he looks directly up to the camera with his hands either side of his head, like
it's like Shawshank Redemption, isn't it? Yeah,
that's the movie.
Yeah,
he has that scene.
He was like, "I'm going to get the most out of this. This is going to be my Shawshank Redemption." Yeah, that's the bit where the pilot is taking off and he's like, don't take off. There's going to be too much ash in the engine. You're going to crash.
Yeah.
And he's like, please,
I like the thing you noticed about every character that dies in this generally had it. You have to take out those sort of two promiscuous, people in the hot springs, But you're right about that, and it's made me look at it a slightly different way, as if they've called it like Dante's Peak, and maybe they're like thinking of the deeper themes of like why people.
The reason they called it Dante's Peak, it was reference to Dante's Inferno. Yeah, it is referencing that kind of thing.
And I just wonder if they're in their own hell, they've chosen their own.
Well, there is
their
that,
own fates or something.
On the subject of Paul, his death, there is an element of catharsis there, where he's on the bridge. And I mean, he definitely could have jumped to make it if he'd have just got out of the car.
There's so many films back then where they could have just...
Yeah, but that's a fairly common trope, isn't it? But there is that moment where he's kind of like... I can't remember what he says, but it's something, and you can see the kind of the catharsis of him going, I'm okay with it. It's kind of my own fault. I should have listened to Harry. And I'm going, and then the dam or the bridge then completely, just flips over and he goes into sea. And there's actually, I don't know if you've ever heard of the Wilhelm scream. So the Wilhelm scream,
the Star Wars.
Yeah. It's not Star Wars scream. It's from an old cowboy movie in the 1930s, I think. And it's like in everything, and it's like a really distinctive scream. So if you haven't heard it, you probably have, but.
It's weird they use it for him, but it's used for Boba Fett, I think. It's used in so much stuff. But so there's that catharsis there. And actually that, it's not for that scene. Well, it is for that scene. It's kind of, but the actual, so the dam breaking, have you seen how that was done? I don't think so.
So
is it more scale models?
No.
Oh no! I saw
they
how
actually built a dam. Yeah. So they said they had something like a 90,000 gallon tank at one end of this kind of structure that they built. Then they had these doors which they could mechanically open to let all the water through. Then that went down to this makeshift dam that would split in a certain way and make it look like it's properly crumbling. And then to get all the debris in that, load of crew are standing at one end out of shot, and they're throwing like twigs and mud and all the sort of stuff that the water would be picking up. So all of that we see, it's not CGI and it's not miniatures, it's actually all kind of maybe not quite that size, but certainly not a miniature.
It was massive.
It's absolutely, and it's just like that's, and it's interesting because Roger Donaldson was saying, it's one of these things where it's a one-shot type thing where if I don't get it now, I've got to wait another month for it to be put back together and to do it again. So it kind of needs to be, and what he done is he was like, I could use one camera, but if that camera goes wrong, I'm lost. So he had something like 20 different cameras all set up.
Some of them did go wrong.
And like 3 of them like wouldn't work. And so he's like, I'm so glad I've done that. And you know, naturally, you get your different angles. Yeah. But, you know, so that's what I mean about, like, obviously that costs money. But people wouldn't necessarily make that choice today.
Yeah.
They would most probably do it all with CGI. And that, again, it's that common trope that we keep going over. And that would work kind of well for a certain effect that you want to create. But having it look, because that to me just looks like a dam break, and it's like,
for sure,
because it essentially model. It is. It's not.
And I feel like I don't know what I was going to say. It's funny, Ryan. Damn.
Damn.
Damn. I think I said the correct thing. I was going to say something. Oh, that's it. Just how meta it is. It's like we talk about the dog earlier, and like it's, you know, it's very like we're only going to get one chance at this, and I only had one chance for the dog to jump on the car, and they're only going to get one chance to do these. Like they would have done it again, but they would have had to build the whole dam back up or whatever. I don't know.
Same with the church in the street when it first erupts and the earthquake starts. They rigged that, and they were like, it's got to be done first time, otherwise we've lost our church.
Wow.
But the level of detail they actually went into, as I said earlier, they used an actual town, and there was actually people like who were walking up to stores in that town and going, why can't I not get in? Why? And then going in and being like, why is this all like look like it's been demolished? And it's because it's set ready for the film, and it's not actually a shop at all. It's just a completely made up thing, but it looks so real, and so much attention to detail has been taken into it that people who live in that town just think it's an actual shop.
That's just amazing.
And you could cut corners in places like, I don't think anybody would really care if they didn't really look like shops. But knowing that level of detail has gone into it just means that that people are doing a good job.
I think when they're putting that much effort, level detail there, it means they're putting it into most other aspects of the movie too. And I feel like with this film, there's generally not really anything that sort of, it's, all the set pieces are sort of all good. There's nothing too stupid in it, really. I like that bit where he dies on the bridge. I always remember that bit, really. And, with the cars crossing over the bridge and then it snaps off. I think that's
that was done with miniatures.
Yeah,
they the level of detail to recreate those cars, like I've seen them doing it. And as soon as you see it in context with everything else, you see it's a miniature. But you wouldn't, unless you know how filmmaking is done, you wouldn't watch that and go, that's a miniature, because the bits where the level of detail where you could pick it up on, like the car or the van, the big. It's quite a distinctive Dodge orange van. You could pick up on that quite easily if it wasn't the same. Like, I always remember watching a film called Arlington Road, which I'm going to spoil it for people now. The kind of crux of that is that somebody, I think, goes undercover to figure out if somebody's like a terrorist, with Jeff Bridges and Tim Robbins.
Nice.
I think Jeff Bridges is like an undercover FBI or something like that. It's been a long time since I watched it. The thing I remember from that more than anything is the kind of main scene at the end where he follows Tim Robbins to the point where he thinks he's going to find out he is a terrorist. He follows him. He gets out of his car, parks next to Tim Robbins' car, looks in his car. So he follows Tim Robbins up to this place, confronts him, and he hasn't found any evidence that Tim Robbins is this terrorist. He then drives out, goes back down to his car, drives out, and then it turns out that the bomb has been in his car. So he's now the person who's going to get the bomb going to the right place. But the thing I always pick out with that is that because of the level of attention to detail, people who know cars or even don't know cars notice that he's supposed to be getting into a car that looks similar to his own, because that's the whole point. But he gets into a car that is quite clearly not his car. Yeah. Like, it's the same colour and that's it. It's like, it's not quite the same, but it's like thinking, oh, I'm going to get into my Ford Fiesta, and you get into a Land Rover. It's like quite clearly not the same car, and it's like that level of detail wasn't thought about in that film. So if you'd have done the same thing here to come around on a big long point, if you do the same thing here and go, okay, well, yeah, all it needs to be is the same colour, you can see the hole and see, the illusion's lost because I know that's not the same van, but you don't pick that up here. So that level of detail is just great.
Apart from your dad.
Well, yeah, but that's my dad. He's got his own issues when it comes to watching things. I think it's really interesting because, as I say, all of the scientific stuff in there is fairly accurate. All of the filmmaking stuff is really well done, and looking at actually the kind of audience perception of this, it's not massively great. Like, obviously you have things like Volcano, which obviously is what I would consider the worst film, and IMDb ratings and all of those things kind of fall into that same way of thinking. But this isn't necessarily a well-regarded film. I think it wasn't critically received very well, which I would ask the question, well, what is it you're looking for then from a disaster movie? If it's because you don't like disaster movies, that's kind of not the point. If you're looking for a disaster movie, what kind of more could you want from Dante's Peak? And I don't know if there is an answer to that, because I think it does most of the things pretty well.
I think it's just it's just a lot of big set pieces. I mean, after that bit, what I would say about watching this is it doesn't feel very long, but it is it's like almost 2 hours or something.
Yeah.
But it sort of flies by, and then before you know it, they're in that last cave, and then he's going to retrieve Elf. And then, because even what we spoke up to with the man, is there anything between there and then he just drives as fast as he can into that cave where the boy was hiding?
I don't think there is. I think it's...
Because once they've got the dog, they've done that.
I think it's, literally from the point of getting the dog.
Yeah, so even if there was something...
Yeah.
I mean... By the time they're in that cave, I was like, oh, I know it resolves. Maybe once you've seen it once, it resolves pretty soon. And maybe that is a set piece in itself, where it's actually quite good, that bit where it starts to fall down on him, isn't it? And he gets that really bad injury on his arm. Yeah. And just before that is my favourite, have you ever been deep sea fishing? No, all that stuff.
It's difficult sometimes because it's a bit of a hokey line and a bit of a hokey sort of sequence and dialogue, but I don't really know why, if that makes sense. I know it's shit, but I don't know why it's shit.
I think because he is the perfect man.
He doesn't seem like he goes deep sea fishing.
No, and
he to be fair, he does say he hasn't been deep sea fishing either, but he doesn't seem like the guy who would want to go deep sea fishing.
I think what's funny about the whole thing is that together they are the perfect family. They Linda Hamilton is like a mayor and a coffee shop thing. Shadow, these kids really care about the nan, even though she was doomed to die at Dante's Peak.
As we've already said, had it coming,
yeah. And then he's just turned up on their doorstep as this
she's exactly what she was looking for, and he's exactly what.
And then to add on top of that, he wants to go deep sea. I don't think after that first boat trip they've had with him that they kind of want to go.
I'm sorry, I don't want to get on another boat with you ever, mate. Last time we did, my gran died, so maybe not again.
Off a shore or something.
Yeah, well, I suppose it's that thing of
deep sea. Surely means
it's almost like he's not just a volcanologist; he knows how to have fun as well.
Do you think it's just as top of it's just the most recent point in his head? It's like, oh, what can I say to make these kids happy? What would you have said? And the last thing is, I was just on the boat. It's like, what could he have said?
Yeah, I suppose. That's.
You guys have been to
Disneyland. I suppose it's a way of doing. Have you ever been to Disneyland without saying Disneyland? Isn't it? And it does. That I get that whole thing of it being something I can do to take their minds off it because they're young children. I get that, but I don't know what it is. It is just a bit hokey and a bit kind of like, can we not talk about deep sea fishing right now? Can we attend to the matter at hand, please?
And when he goes to get Elf, the beeping, and he kicks it, and he kicks it to make it work, much like the stupid spider legs thing, and
because everybody knows that's how technology works. Just kick it and it starts working.
I mean, when it starts all coming down on him, it was actually that was actually more tense than I remember, because I guess I thought it was going to resolve at that point, and then actually he's stuck under there for quite a while, isn't he?
I also didn't realise quite how stuck he was.
Yeah.
Like, from memory, I thought, I know he gets stuck in a car, but he's still like sitting upright and it's all fine. But then we watch it and it's like, I literally remember saying, this is like my worst nightmare.
Yeah.
Although I don't know why this is relevant, I'm going to say it anyway. The first thing I thought of when he was rescued was like, because he'd been there for like a couple of days, I think they'd said, or the amount of time.
Yeah.
It was just certainly a prolonged amount, less that it was more than like, a couple of hours. And I remember just thinking he'd be covered in piss and shit. Let's be honest.
Yeah.
Let's not beat around the bush here. He still comes out, and it's that James Bond thing. He still comes out and his hair's all fine and, a little bit.
He looks great. But he looks great. Pierce Brosnan looks great his whole life.
Yeah.
There's an interview of him on like Michael Parkinson or something, like from like the 90s, and he just looks ridiculous. Like he's just
you can see why he was cast as James Bond, can't you?
Yeah, and there are some, I don't know if you got this, but when they all, obviously they say that, did Paul make it? Captain Paul, no, he didn't. I was like, oh no, there's that bit. But then after that, it's obviously all the kids and Linda Hamilton come out, and there's some really like extras really hamming it up with the celebration. Did you notice any of them?
You always get some extras going into business for themselves, didn't you?
But they were really like celebrating, like like they just like. It was like the end of like a Star Wars celebration movie with the Ewoks or something. They're like really celebrating.
To be fair, the music does kind of fit that as well. The music at that point, again, I have a bit of a problem, and this is a personal thing, because there's nothing wrong with the music there, but I don't like it when music tells me how to feel. Yeah. If you know what I mean, like it's going, oh, now you should be thinking, oh, such a happy ending, da 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 da. I don't really like that, but it obviously fits with that ending. I would say that the last, as you say, you kind of make it, or just seem like you were making the point I was going to make, in the sense of they go from saving the dog and then it's straight to the cave, and then it feels, that's the only thing, is the third act again feels a little bit rushed.
Yeah.
It feels very much like you've had all these big set pieces, you've had, let's say an hour and 50 of a 2-hour film, you've done all of this, and you're going to wrap it up all in 10 minutes. It's almost like we almost kind of want to see them 4 years after again, when, almost like, oh, they're now a happy family. Like, here's a little bit of...
Would you add another 4 years later?
Here's what... Or maybe not 4 years later, but I'd certainly do some time after they've been rescued. And they're maybe not in Dante's Peak, but they're somewhere, and they're all in the kitchen, and they're all doing the same thing as they'd done when they was doing the magic trick and that. And then maybe there's like a little bit of an earthquake, not a proper earthquake, but something, and they all kind of look and go, is this happening again? And then maybe there's like a big delivery truck or something outside that shakes the house, and it's all just a bit like... That
reminds me of something.
That's it's not original, because I feel like I've stolen that from something, but that's how I would kind of edit, because it kind of wraps up that we know they get together, whereas I feel like if they were to make a Dante's Peak 2, I know exactly what they'd end up doing. It would be Pierce Brosnan's character. Oh, we got together for like a year in it, but it didn't work because she never listened to me. I was too invested in my geology or something.
Maybe her son started to get into rocks and it just didn't... She wasn't liking it. I mean...
I don't like you getting into rocks.
There was the glass of water in this movie, wasn't there?
Yeah.
The Jurassic Park glass of water. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
The shaky glass. Yeah. Is this after Jurassic Park? It must be.
Yes. Jurassic Park was 93.
Oh, good knowledge.
So this film is just over 25 years old.
I think for me, this film, I like it on the rewatch. I kind of like I kind of like the setting of it this time rewatching it. I think 'cause we were watching Gilmore Girls and stuff. I kind of like the sort of town meeting they called, you know, and that section of film a lot more. And I guess I've seen a lot. I can remember pretty much the things that happened. I guess it's brutal what happens to the town of Dante's Peak. It really does just get like wiped
they ain't
off the
recovering
face
from that, are they? You know.
And I think this time rewatching it, what I enjoyed most about it was I think Linda Hamilton, and although some of the dialogue in that was a bit clunky, and their relationship was a bit like not the best. I feel like they had some good chemistry. To be honest.
That's the main thing, isn't it? I think that's what powers through is the fact they have the good chemistry means you can get away with that clunky dialogue in places and it's not too much of a problem. I think if they were, you know, if you could sense that there was no dynamic between them at all, you would really need the script to do all of that hard work. You know, for example, and I'm not saying he was ever considered, but let's say you put Nicolas Cage in that role, for example, that chemistry perhaps isn't going to be there, so that dialogue needs to be on point and needs to do the heavy lifting. So I kind of get that. And what you were saying about the town, it's interesting watching it now in our 30s, where the things that I'm picking out, as I said earlier, I was like, oh, I'd quite like to live in that town. I'm now thinking, what are the schools like around there? Oh, you know, what's the weather like at that sort of time? And then I'm going, oh, God, such a shame what's happened to that lovely town. Rather than the people dying, I couldn't, you know, I can take them and leave them. What's the town like, you know? So
it's a nice town.
So shall we cover that ending segment of further watching? So I'll kick us off. Obviously, Volcano is probably going to be on the list if you like disaster movies as well. It's very, very similar. I think it's a far inferior film. It's a lot more over the top, a lot less grounded. But if you like volcano films, it's probably one to, you know, go and have a look at. Another one I thought of was The Day After Tomorrow. Dennis Quaid, Jake Gyllenhaal, very similar. I mean, any disaster movie is very similar. Natural disaster film is similar, but that's I remember that being quite good. Haven't watched that in a while. Ironically, I brought that at the same time as I brought Dante's Peak.
Oh, nice.
Just before you mentioned about doing it. And also I got 98's Deep Impact as well.
I used to like that one.
Yeah,
that's a good one.
I mean, that's more of a space one, and I think like you've got Volcano and Dante's Peak. In 98, you had Armageddon and Deep Impact.
Yeah.
It's that, you know, which one's your favourite? They're both essentially the same film type thing. So those are my further watchings. How about yourself?
For me, I mean, I guess you've covered the
kind of obvious
apocalyptic ones. So, and God, I feel like they were always on when we were young, and I feel like they've maybe got into our minds.
It says
like
a lot about our childhood, doesn't it? You know, we spent our childhood watching disaster movies. That's how I get my kicks off, you know.
Yeah, and then whenever I rewatch one, they're never as good as like Dante's Peak. I like this one, but when I rewatched Armageddon recently, I couldn't be bothered.
Have you heard the story about Michael Bay and Ben Affleck clashing on that one?
No.
It's quite funny. I mean, Michael Bay sounds like a bit of a tyrant anyway. There's the classic story of Ewan McGregor, which I'll say as well afterwards.
You busted my ass.
So basically, they're on the set of Armageddon and they're talking about the script, and Ben Affleck goes, "Isn't it just easier to train astronauts to be drillers or whatever they are, rather than train a load of, you know, drillers to be astronauts?" And I think Michael Bay said something along the lines of, "This is my fucking movie, you do what I say," that sort of thing. And then you got the classic Ewan McGregor one on the set of The Island with Scarlett Johansson. I think Michael Bay ended up calling her a cunt. Wow. On the set, which tells you the style of directing. Like, if that was me, I'd be like, you know, we're making a movie here, we're not saving lives. Doesn't need to resort to that kind of point.
I don't know why you'd be calling people CUNT if you were saving lives.
Yeah, I mean,
maybe if you were doing Armageddon.
I mean, I could understand. I'm not saying I'd be okay with it, but I think I'd understand it because of the, you know, what you're doing is a lot more important when you're making a movie. At the end of the day, you're making a movie.
Let's lead by Pierce Brosnan's example.
Exactly.
I'm sorry, Pierce. Everything I said was wrong. You were right. It's okay.
It's okay. Don't worry about it. But yeah, following that incident with Michael Bay, apparently Ewan McGregor just went up and punched Michael Bay and then said, "You don't speak to women like that."
Wow.
So,
isn't Ewan McGregor the best?
Yeah, it's fucking Obi-Wan Kenobi.
Yeah. My movies would just send me spiraling into a Pierce Brosnan.
Fairly naturally, isn't it?
So I'd probably want to check out Remington Steele, to be honest. That's probably something I've only heard about that, but I'd like to one day watch that. And I guess that's not a movie, but it's serious. But just the James Bonds, to like Goldeneye, Tomorrow Never Dies.
Such a great film, Goldeneye, isn't it?
I mean, nowadays I'd even it never used to be the others, but I would probably say Die Another Day. Well,
I think out of the 4, Die Another Day, or the 4 that Brosnan done, I think Die Another Day is probably the lesser of the 4. Still an enjoyable flick nonetheless. I think, GoldenEye, which is the first one, I think is the best one. But again, perhaps that's because, as I said in Mortal Kombat's episode, I borrowed that from a family friend and never gave it back. And so it was always in my VHS player.
I think nowadays, the one I'd want to watch now is the Elliot Carver one with the Tomorrow Never Dies and Michelle Yeoh.
Yeah.
I just think that is... I just think there's Pierce Brosnan doing more stuff like this, really. But he's got less he's less talking about fish and more cars and stuff. But I mean the other one is I watched probably like 2 years ago on like Amazon was The Lawnmower Man. I would say watch that. Have you seen that?
I have seen that. It's a bit of a... it's fairly problematic in its depiction of people with learning difficulties.
Yeah. I mean, I hadn't thought of that, to be honest, so maybe I should think about that.
What I like about that film is I think it was fairly ahead of its time. I think you could do a lot more with that today than you could in the early 90s.
I think it's just like it's interesting to see Pierce Brosnan in different scenarios, and that is like him in a sci-fi scenario. And he doesn't really fit. He doesn't seem like the right casting for that movie. But that's why I kind of enjoyed watching it. From
what I remember, he plays a lot more questionable character, doesn't he? He doesn't play because that's true. In this, he's very much he's not James Bond, but he's very much the all-round good guy, take him home to meet your mum type character. In that, he's a lot more. He's a scientist, and he's kind of manipulating that dude.
He's actually quite bad.
Yeah. Another one, if you want that similar kind of ilk, I realise I'm about to recommend a film that I can't think what it's called. But there's two actually. There's one called The Ghostwriter, or The Ghost, sorry, with Ewan McGregor, where he plays he basically plays Tony Blair, but a bit more sinister, who's going to write his memoirs, and it turns out he's done some shady stuff, and the ghostwriter has to, basically does his own investigation to try and reveal all this whistleblower stuff. And then there's another one with Jackie Chan, where I can't remember what it's called. I want to say it's called The Immigrant, but I don't think it's called that, but something like that. And he plays basically an IRA terrorist who...
I've not seen that, but
it's pretty good, actually. Yeah. Pretty good. And Jackie Chan plays a father of a daughter who was killed in one of his terrorist attacks, and so he goes on a rampage to try and get the guy. That's pretty good as well.
Yeah. So yeah, my ones are just more Pierce Brosnan ones, to be honest.
You can't really go wrong with Pierce Brosnan, can you? I mean, there's an element of like, and this probably again so a little bit more about me. I was saying when I was watching this with Hannah, I was like, I think it was the point where Linda Hamilton was like, obviously becoming attracted to Pierce Brosnan, and I made the comment to Hannah. I went, to be fair, you would with Pierce Brosnan, wouldn't you? And she went, I don't know. And I thought, what's wrong with you? How can you not like Pierce Brosnan? I'm not gay, and but Pierce Brosnan, he's a bit of all right in my book.
I feel like for me, he was like he's kind of quite fatherly in that movie in Dante's Peak, and as a kid watching that movie, I guess you would feel like you're in safe hands if he's around. Yeah. And I feel like he just seems like I don't know. I feel like, although we're talking about Pierce Brosnan a lot, actually, Linda Hamilton really does carry this movie quite a lot, I think.
She does a lot of the heavy lifting, doesn't she? Because she has to be that, because I think a lot of Harry Dalton's dialogue is some of that kind of, not exposition, but that technical jargon, which you can only really do so much with it. And so she has to be the believable mum, the believable mayor, the believable love interest. Let's say you put Cameron Diaz in that role, or you put Charlize Theron, although Charlize Theron is a very, very good actress. Somebody who...
I feel like Cameron Diaz could do it as well, to be honest.
She could, but not at that time.
Yeah, fair.
I'm just trying to think of somebody who is more conventionally a Bond girl.
Yeah.
Who's somebody who you would, let's say... although now thinking about it, I was just about to say Fam Yankson from GoldenEye. I can't think of her name in GoldenEye.
Is it Natalia?
Not Natalia, the other one, the bad woman.
Oh, on a top.
Yeah. Wow. That was so written by a man, that name, wasn't it?
Well, I think all of James Bond.
Yeah. But I was about to say her, but actually she could do this quite well as well.
I think Linda Hamilton somehow managed to pull out the bag. You're right. She kind of weirdly... It's not believable that she is the mayor and everything else, but she's kind of quite believable playing the role of...
Apparently one thing she was saying is that Roger Donaldson said to her, it's quite nice that you're being normal in this. Because I think obviously everybody kind of knows her from like Terminator and Terminator 2. Particularly in Terminator 2, she's like a completely like militant, driven to a fault kind of character. And here she is a bit normal. She is just playing a normal mum who happens to be the mayor. And it's not believable that she's a mayor, but her being the mayor is believable, if that makes sense. Yeah. So in the context of the film, the fact the mayor also has a coffee shop and does that perhaps isn't believable, but it's made believable by the casting of Linda Hamilton.
Yeah, no, for sure.
With as I say, if you put...
She kind of brings realness to anything, probably, doesn't
she?
That's
as I say, if you put... somebody like... I can only think of the Bond girl who's in Quantum of Solace, and I can't remember her name.
I don't know them very well.
But if you put her in that role, it doesn't feel... Because she doesn't feel like a conventional American mum. Doesn't feel like she could be a mayor. So it's good casting there. But one other film I think I would suggest to watch is a similar kind of disaster movie, but with a lot more kind of heart and a lot more going for it. And it was really panned when it came out. It's Danny Boyle's Sunshine.
Oh, I've not seen that.
It's basically they have to like restart the sun because the sun's dying. It does go into a bit more detail. It's got Cillian Murphy in, obviously from 28 Days Later and Dark Knight or Batman Begins. Sorry, it turns into a weird kind of slasher film towards the end. So the third act's a bit ropey, but it has all of those big disaster kind of elements in there, but it also has like kind of a real philosophical kind of question to it as well, which this doesn't have.
Yeah,
I think if you tried to rope it in there, it would be a bit weird, but it's just I think people would like it if they like Dante's Peak.
I guess that's when we said what would people want out of this that's not in it. I guess actually it's called it Dante's Peak. It's got like reference to some deep, psychological stuff.
Yeah.
And I guess that is what's missing. Maybe just some more depth to like some... I don't know if that would be more conversations about stuff or I think the thing you picked up on about the people that dying have sort of sealed their own fate in a way. Not that you said that, but that noticing that, I feel like I guess there could be more of that in it if I was looking at this as like one of those people that give it like a 60% on because for me this is like well good, cool set pieces, great action, disaster, Pierce Brosnan being Pierce Brosnan, but I think some people would sort of try and compare it to a movie like what you just said.
And I think for the vast majority of people, ourselves included, we just want to watch a film that we enjoy. Yeah. And if you enjoy this film, fantastic. You don't need any of that. If you don't enjoy it, perhaps that's where you're looking for those philosophical things or, those things that perhaps we've covered.
Marco
Michael Caine's Tangerine Dream Whipped Cream for all your pudding needs. Simply add milk of your choice and wait 6 to 12 days. Michael Caine's Tangerine Dream Whipped Cream from the Michael Caine Tangerine Emporium.
So unfortunately, that brings us on to the end of the episode. Thanks very much for listening. Don't forget to like and subscribe to wherever you get your podcasts. Also, head over to our social media platforms to stay up to date with everything Bury Our Bones with Cinema. So for today, I've been Ryan Etherington, he's been Simon Keet, and we have been Bury Our Bones with Cinema. Be a one-button job. Boom, 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 toom, toom, toom.
I have a terrible tendency to just scroll about but if you're talking, when we're doing it, I still find it slightly distracting.
It's a bit weird, but I think it's a bit weird, but I suppose...
maybe if you listen to it back, see if it sounds... I was like, I'm going to have to stop it. You're listening back
Good job I observed that well, wasn't it?